This is hilarious and great news for the world. The National Endowment for Democracy. This is their website, which it might not be existing for very long. National Endowment for Democracy files lawsuit seeking access to congressionally appropriated funds. Today, the National Endowment for Democracy filed a lawsuit in U.S. District Court against executive branch agencies, referring to the Trump administration and officials for unlawfully withholding its congressionally appropriated funding, which is essential to fulfilling NED's statutory mandate of advancing democracy around the world. The lawsuit states that the government has wrongly denied NED access to $167 million in already obligated funds and refused to release an additional $72 million already appropriated by Congress. These actions have severely disrupted NED's operations, impacted its workforce, and jeopardized its ability to support democracy organizations resisting authoritarian regimes. Peter Roskam, NED board chair, and NED president Damon Wilson are protesting. We're eager to resolve the issue so our grantees can continue their essential work defending fundamental freedoms from authoritarian overreach. And they cite all kinds of basically constitutionally mandated functions of Congress, which obligate it to give out the money to them. This is great. It means people around the world will not be subjected to violent color revolutions and undemocratic coups, and can begin to chart. I mean, not that the Trump administration might not find other avenues for interfering, meddling, and toppling governments, including elected governments, but that NED has been this destabilizing force for so much of the world's population, and now it can't pay its arsonists, its rent-a-riot mobs, its regime change operatives, and its stenographers around the world. And it's claiming there's some kind of constitutional obligation to release the money.
And now they're going to have to get a real job. Like, what do you do if you've been like a lifelong operative in DC, like working at, like the NED and adjacent think tanks that just thrive off of promoting destabilization and regime change and pretending to be an expert in a country, and granted, the acclaim as an expert simply because you serve U.S. regime change interests. But once the money goes away, like, what do you do with your life? Like, what are you qualified for when your only job is to pretend to be an expert or like some pro-democracy advocate whose real function is just to promote regime change? Like, it's,
I can think of another industry for regime change lunatics who have no talent.
What's that?
The media.
Yeah, 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 that's true. But there's a lot of job. But people have already taken that slot already in the media. I mean, how many people can get picked up for jobs now that this is going away? It's just, obviously there are federal workers who I think have been unjustly laid off and who do provide good services. But this is one area where you have to say this is a good decision for this country and for the world, because these people have spread nothing but misery and chaos and destabilization everywhere.
Yeah, I talked to some, people I know in like upper Northwest DC. I'm in DC. They'll tell you like our neighbors are leaving because they lost this or that grant, and then a lot of what you hear is like our neighbors are FBI agents, or these people down the street, they're FBI agents, and now they don't have a job, and like they're USAID friends are losing their contracts. And it's like, it's happening in the affluent quarters of DC. Like, it's actually causing some kind of social disruption in DC. I totally oppose Trump and Elon taking a complete buzzsaw to federal government in order to replace it with corporate control. And that's what's happening. They're going, and with Elon in charge, it's like going from the deep state to the douche state, but imitating Javier Milei's model.
Yeah.
But with NED and USAID, it's like just think of what they did to people in so many other countries where they dismantled unions, they dismantled entire societies. they played a huge part in what we're about to talk about in Syria with the
Yeah.
destruction of that society.
Yeah.
They spawned violent riots in Venezuela, in Nicaragua. They spawned violent riots, filled the country with hooligans, terrorized people, bombarded police stations, horror after horror, all in the name of fighting authoritarianism. And what happens when they lose and the color revolution fails is the government cracks down, and what they call authoritarianism increases because they become paranoid. They're not going to allow it to happen again. Why would Nicaragua allow these opposition groups to operate if their goal is to violently destabilize the country? And then they get sanctioned and average people suffer.
There's a line in Ben Rhodes' memoir where he's recounting, and Ben Rhodes, who served as a top aide to Barack Obama. And Ben Rhodes says he was recounting the conversations between Putin and Obama about Ukraine after the coup there in 2014. And Ben Rhodes says, Putin seemed to think that the U.S. was behind the protests that overthrew Yanukovych simply because some of the protest leaders received funding from U.S. pro-democracy organizations. So, first of all, and Ben Rhodes, first of all, can't see the contradiction between, funding people in the name of pro-democracy who take part in coups. Like, there's no contradiction there. And then he also thinks it's so weird that Putin would possibly see the U.S. being involved simply because they funded the people who led the coup. But because they called it pro-democracy, I guess we're not supposed to take any umbrage with that or see anything wrong with that. I mean, but that's what the U.S. does around the world.
It's nice to see, NED employees on furlough. Most employees of the International Republican Institute, the National Democratic Institute, and their parent org, National Endowment for Democracy, have been furloughed, according to the Miami Herald. Bad news for regime change lunatics everywhere, especially in Miami. Great news for everyone else. That's what Riot Reed of the Grayzone says, and I heartily agree. And the NED is saying that they're like constitutionally entitled to their money. I mean, what would the framers of the Constitution say about the NED if we went back in time and told them what it was and what it does? Like Mr. Franklin, it gives out money to these Cubans in Miami so they can plan to give money to other Cubans so they can have fake protests with artists who urinate on Cuban flags, and then the U.S. can come in and make a lot of money. Does this sound like it makes sense? This is the Constitution. It gives money. Mr. Jefferson, we need to give these white helmets out to people in Syria so they can run around taking pictures and saying that there are chemical attacks so then the U.S. can bomb that country over there. And it's Assyria. You fought the Barbary wars, the pirates. It's kind of like that, but we need these guys with little white helmets to run around so that we can tell the American public we're fighting the war to save the children. Do you get it, Mr. Jefferson? Like, what would they say about that? This whole apparatus is insane. And it's part of a global empire that needs to be rolled back. I meet like so many progressives in Washington who are like, Max, you don't understand about USAID. Like, they actually do good stuff. Like, well, then just have them do the good stuff and stop being a front for the CIA. Like, it needs to be.
Yeah, and it's too bad. It's too bad for it's too bad for all the people who are actually being hurt by funding cuts to USAID, because there's bound to be some good things that USAID does that are being hurt in foreign countries. It's a disservice to them to have this aid organization being exploited to serve regime change ends. I don't see why that's hard, and it's so well documented now in so many different countries. So it's the people who've weaponized USAID who have to answer for all the vulnerable people who are now being hurt by these funding cuts.
And Americans didn't know this existed before Trump. I think most Americans, like, except for those who followed the Grayzone and a few other websites, they had no idea. And once they find out what they're paying for, it's just like, it boggles the mind. Like Joe Rogan, that's one of the biggest shows in America. Like, shows, period. Like, not just podcasts, but things Americans watch. It's mostly Americans who support Trump. Rogan will only have on like Trump approved or Elon approved guests now. It's not like an open discussion like it used to be. He doesn't have like critical leftists on. It's like if he wants to talk about Palestine, it has to be some guy who somehow supports Trump, but doesn't like Israel. And he had Mike Benz on, who is in the pro-Trump camp. And Mike Benz told America about the reporting we've been doing at the Grayzone and focused in on our reports on how the U.S. has been paying rappers in Cuba and Bangladesh, as well as LGBTQIA, or should we say LGBTQCIA activists in Bangladesh to spread regime change. As soon as any American hears that, including people in the LGBTQIA spectrum, they start to get freaked out. They're not supposed to know about it. It is overt, but they're not supposed to know what's really going on. Like, we're paying rappers to do regime change. And like most people who watch Rogan are anti-communist. They probably want to topple the Cuban government, but they get freaked out by that. So it's pretty much over now for them. I don't see how they can come back from this because too many Americans know about it. Too many Americans didn't know about what was coming in Syria, the disaster that was coming in Syria, but we've been warning about it for a few years now. And now it's come to a head. And these USAID, National Endowment for Democracy, all those regime change groups were at the forefront of the project that was also covert to topple the Syrian government and replace it with what we now see in power, which is carrying out hideous sectarian pogrom against Alawites on the coast. So